video covers the second step in the 5-step revenue recognition model. In our past episodes of this series, we have gone through step 1 of the revenue recognition model, which is to identify the contract with the customer. We are from Kong Lim and Partners Chartered Accountants of Singapore and a member of JHI and Task, and in this video we will go through step 2, identifying the performance obligations. Once a contract with a customer has been identified in step 1, we have to now identify the performance obligation, that is, assessing the goods or services promised in the contract. First, the performance obligation has to be identified as either goods or services that are distinct or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and that have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. An example of a distinct goods or service would be hiring a photographer for an event, while an example of a series of distinct goods or services would be hiring an accountant for monthly services. However, not all performance obligations are that straightforward. Let's go through in detail what criteria needs to be met in order to consider a distinct goods or service or a series of distinct goods or service. For a contract to be considered a distinct goods or service, the customer must be able to benefit from the performance obligation on its own and not in connection with something else. And the performance obligation must be separately identifiable from other promises. Firstly, what does it mean to benefit from the performance obligation on its own? This can be goods or services that are sold separately or can be used separately. Examples of these are most consumer goods. Secondly, let's break down how performance obligations can be separately identifiable from other promises. Number 1, the entity doesn't provide integration services for that goods or services. Number 2, the goods or services doesn't significantly alter other promised products. Number 3, if the customer should decide not to purchase the goods or services, it would not significantly affect other products promised in the contract. Let's look at an example. Most car dealers sell cars together with a car maintenance contract. This is considered a distinct service as the customer is able to benefit from it individually and it is separately identifiable. For a contract to be identified as a series of distinct goods or services, the goods or services need to be substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. A series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same are those that are separately identifiable within the context of an arrangement, for example, one magazine delivery out of a set of 12 monthly deliveries in a subscription. Next, for goods or services to have the same pattern of transfer to the customer, 2 criteria must be met. Firstly, each distinct goods or service in the series would meet the criteria of being a performance obligation satisfied over time. And, secondly, the same method would be used to measure the entity's progress towards complete satisfaction of the performance obligation to transfer each distinct goods or services in the series to the customer. The first criteria states that the entity must transfer control of the products over time and therefore recognizes revenue over time. Here are 3 criteria with examples for a performance obligation to be satisfied over time. Number 1, the customer simultaneously receives and consumes the benefits provided by the entity's performance as the entity performs it, as in the case of the magazine subscription. Number 2, the entity's performance creates or enhances an asset that the customer controls as the asset is created or enhanced. This may be the construction of a shopping building where additions of shops slowly add value to the place. Number 3, The entity's performance does not create an asset with an alternative use to the entity, and the entity has an enforceable right to payment for performance complete to date. These are usually very specialized services like manufacturing a device with a custom design for a specific customer or a very specialized software for a specific company. On the other hand, a performance obligation that is satisfied at a point in time is one where the entity has the immediate right to payment for the asset, where the asset has been transferred to the customer with its legal title and significant risks and rewards of owning the asset. The second criteria is that you recognize revenue over time by measuring the progress towards complete satisfaction of the performance obligation. The standard states that an entity shall apply a single method of measuring progress for each performance obligation satisfied over time, and the entity shall apply that method consistently to similar performance obligations. Let's look at an example. In September 2019, an entity enters a contract with a customer to refurbish a building and install new elevators for total consideration of $5 million. The promised refurbishment service, including the installation of the elevators, is a single performance obligation satisfied over time. A summary of the expected costs is as follows. The entity uses an input method based on costs incurred to measure its progress towards complete satisfaction of the performance obligation. As of 31st December 2019, the entity observes that other costs incurred are $500,000 and therefore the performance is 20% complete. To recap, we have just gone through how to identify the performance obligation in a contract according to IFRS 15. The first step is to identify if the goods or services in question are distinct. Secondly, if the goods or services are considered a series of distinct goods or services. In order to be identified as a series of distinct goods or services, the performance obligation must be substantially the same, and they must have the same pattern of transfer. In order to have the same pattern of transfer, the goods or services must be satisfied over time, and their progress must be measurable towards the complete satisfaction of the performance obligation. For more in-depth examples of how to identify the performance obligation in different industries, stay tuned for future episodes of our series.